I could never imagine that this would apply to the state of nationalist historians, and that too at a seminar in JNU. So, my heartiest congratulations. Now, I have to make a few introductory remarks because we have three speakers and I'll make it very brief. We have heard in the morning Professor Tamar and others speak about this debate among nationalist and progressive historians, as they are called, after independence. But it's important for us to realize how conscious Indians were about the need to control the narrative in the colonial period. Fort William College was set up by the East India Company, and one of its objectives was to translate works which were there in Bangla or Sanskrit into English. At that time, it's difficult to imagine this happened, but at that time, three employees of the East India Company, they realized that the possibility of our narrative, our historical narrative, being snatched away from us is very great. So the first three histories, we can call them indigenous histories or nationalist histories, were written in the British period by people who were employed by the East India Company. So this is, when we take back the narrative of his nationalist history, we have to remember that it goes well before independence. It begins with these three employees of the East India Company writing the first three histories of India in the colonial period. After that, the next major work is written in Uttar Pradesh by a person called Raja Shiv Prasad. Raja Shiv Prasad writes a 3-volume history as the dispeller of darkness. So, when we say that we were not aware of the importance of historical narrative, it is wrong. We were aware of the importance of seizing the historical narrative when we were under colonial rule. Now, after that, we think that the narrative slipped out of our hands when Lord Macaulay published his famous minute. But all this time, we have to take note of petitions, representations, which were given by important Hindu or Indian leaders telling the British, don't try to deprive us of our civilizational heritage. So they said, we don't mind learning English because we need it for government jobs. But don't deny us the right and the privilege of pursuing Sanskrit and the vernacular, because our heritage, our civilization is there in these books. So imagine we have a representation before Lord Macaulay's minute, but 3 years after Macaulay's minute, about 8,000 people from Calcutta, they write a representation to the Governor General saying that your intention and your aim is to deny us our nationhood. So, when we talk about Indians not having a sense of history, it is important to be aware of these facts. Now, many historians that you're going to study or discuss in the next 2 days has been given in the performer that has been given to us. There is such a long list. Many historians are bound to be not finding a place in that list, but among the people who should be finding a place is Professor D.C. Sarkar. All these historians, what we call nationalist historians, they were epigraphists, numismatics. They knew about history, they knew about the classical languages, they knew about Persian of the period that they talked about. Janonath Sarkar translated the Ain-e-Akbari from Persian. It was published by the Asiatic Society of Bengal. and R.C. Majumdar and so many others. The point is that there is two books on nationalism in the writing of Indian history written by Professor Dilip Chakravarti. You may have heard of Professor Dilip Chakravarti, and he says that nationalism is very important in the writing of Indian history. Unfortunately, the national sentiment does not find place in our books, but the national sentiment is not a deterrent to historical research. National sentiment is now never biased, and he says that this national sentiment has to be brought back to our narrative. Now, apart from that, there is a book that has been written, a biography of Jadunath Sarkar, written by a historian in recent times. And that historian makes the startling claim that post 1971, there was a very important book written on the economic history of the Mughal Empire, and that book does not mention Jadunath Sarkar even once. So you said that they are wiped out, they are erased. That is the way it happened. Now, before I just want to quickly make a discussion, make a note of, the NCRT books. The NCRT books that were written by leading scholars, they were in use in schools for almost 30 years. The books that were replaced by them existed only for a year. Then the government changed. The books that were replaced were thrown out, and the old books were brought back. Now, what is the distinguishing feature of these old textbooks? I'll give the example of a textbook which was written by Professor Satish Chandra. That book, it talks about, it does not mention the execution of Guru Arjan by Jahangir. And what it says, because the attempt is to deny religion a place in the historical narrative, it says the death of Guru Arjan by Jahangir. Now, a person who's 14, 15 years old, how will that person realize that death by Jahangir means execution on the order of Jahangir? So the entire attempt at history writing was an attempt to erase religion from the narrative. Now, Dilip Chakravarti, he calls these nationalist historians that we are going to discuss over the next 2 days, he says they are pioneer historians. They are pioneer historians. They were all proficient in their disciplines. They knew so much else besides, language, numismatics, everything they were aware of. And he says that nationalism did not come in the way of their objectivity. They never tried to suppress any fact. They presented what they saw. So this nationalist narrative, this attempt to suppress the nationalist narrative, it has a long history. And I just want to make one point. We all know that the country was partitioned along religious lines in 1947. But it is also a fact that majority of the people who voted for partition did not go to the successor states. The majority who stayed behind was not only in UP but in other parts of India also. So in this scenario, when the majority votes for partition and does not go to Pakistan, it was imperative that history be rewritten. And why does history have to be rewritten? Because you have to say that religion played no part in history. The important history moves because of economic factors. So you shift the debate from civilizational, cultural, religious issues, and you talk about economic issues. So, that is the points that we have to keep in mind when we are discussing the narrative, the nationalist narrative in the post-independence period, and how In the late 60s or early 70s, these nationalist historians suddenly found themselves dubbed as communal historians, and they are swept away, and the group that calls itself progressive historians occupies center stage. Now, so the rewriting of history begins with nationalist historians, so called nationalist historians, being dubbed communal historians, and a group that calls itself progressive historians occupying the dominant space in academia and research institutions. The, the key feature of this school was that ideology is at par or at a higher level than historical research. So, the fact that we are sitting here to discuss and to bring back pioneer historians to the centered stage, it's the wheels of time coming full circle, and JNU organizing a 2 day pioneering seminar on pioneer historians is a real landmark development. So, I thank JNU for this, and I have great pleasure in inviting our first speaker, Professor Himanshu Kumar Chaturvedi, to give his keynote address.